Yep. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Shutterstock, for hosting. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. This is 10 tips for serverless backends with Node.js and AWS Lambda. So just about me, working on the test automation team at HBO, where we use Node.js, of course. Also a WebStorm ambassador. So if you guys have any questions about WebStorm, you can always feel free to ask me. I do some consulting on the side about AWS Lambda, and I offer 1 hour free consulting to everyone. So feel free to hit me up. There's my Twitter, and then there's some sample code examples at this GitHub link, and then the slides you can find here. So just to talk about it, there are some other places where you can run serverless backend code. I'm going to talk about here AWS Lambda, Amazon Web Services, and on Lambda you can run Node.js, Python, and Java. There's also something called Google Cloud Functions, sort of a similar serverless way to run code. And that's right now only closed alpha and just for Node.js. Microsoft Azure also offers a similar kind of service. And it's pretty interesting because on theirs you can also run C#, PHP, and Bash. So that's pretty cool. So why would you want to use serverless? Well, for one reason, it's way cheaper than traditional servers, right? You're billed for AWS in increments of 100 milliseconds. And here you can see, this is from the Lambda/pricing. It costs 1/50,000th of a cent per request, and then 1/600th of a cent for each gigabyte second used. And just in case that changes in the future, you guys can always look at this link here for pricing. So you're especially saving a lot of money if you have underutilized servers, right? There's some blog posts about comparing Lambda to servers where it's just running every second of every hour of the day and kind of comparing them. And most servers aren't really used every second of every hour of every day. So it's really nice to not have your server running when it's not even being used. And really, I mean, it's great for startups, because they're saving money. They're only paying for what they're using. It's also great for large companies looking to try to optimize, cut down on unnecessary EC2 expenses. And so really everyone in between there can benefit from it. So another reason is just that it's easier than traditional servers, right? You don't have to spin up your servers. You don't have to have kind of security experts, DevOps people making sure your servers are safe and locked down from hackers and whoever else trying to get into them. You don't have to worry about when you're spinning up your EC2, choosing what kind of size you need, clustering them later. That's all kind of taken care of behind the scenes. You don't need to fix crashes, right? Update the OS and all these other kind of maintenance that goes along with having a regular Linux box running. And some people, maybe you're doing this at work or on personal projects, you have all these servers. But wouldn't it be nice if your to-do list looked like this? Okay, so those just kind of an intro to serverless. Now I promised you guys 10 tips, so let's get into the 10 tips. So my first tip is just start with Hello World, right? It's pretty easy. Set up an AWS account. You can create a basic Lambda function in AWS console, and then you can even test it right in the console. And you can also test it by calling to it with the AWS SDK. And actually, I was just going to give a quick demo of what this looks like. So this is the AWS console. If we just create a Lambda function and choose blank function, we don't need any triggers, so I'll just hit next. And I'll just call this hello. And you can see here, this is basically a hello world, right? Everything is inside of this handler function, and then you have the callback. And I can just quickly set basic execution. Next. So I'll create the function, and then you can test it right here. These are the different values that you're passing into it when you call it, and we can just hit save and test. And it's running right here. This is the output, and you can see kind of the logs of that running. So that's just a basic hello world. Yes. Yeah, the slides. I had a link before. There's also a link at the end on the last slide. So, all right. So tip 2 is that you can pass data to and from your Lambda functions, right? The event object in that main handler holds the data that you pass into it, and you can pass it either as an object or an array. And Lambdas. All right. Sorry. I just forgot to unmirror my displays. Okay. Right, so the callback function takes 2 arguments, right? Before we saw it said null and then an object that I was returning. So the first one is just an error object, and then the next one is a success object. And that can be a string, a JavaScript object, an array, pretty much anything you want. So actually I have another quick demo. Let me just mirror this again. Okay, this is an example of calling to it from command line. So I have 2 files here. One is just requester.js, and one is the requester with the keys. So I'll show you the one without the keys. So first we require the AWS SDK, and we configure it with our access keys. Those, when you're running this, you put in your own keys for your account. Create a new Lambda object, and the params, we're sending in the name of your function, AWS Lambda function. The payload, I'm just sending this key1 with the string Bob, and key2 with the string James. And then I'm telling the Lambda to invoke this function, and then in the handler, basically just logging out the result. And then I can show you in the console this function called echo as object. It's pretty much just taking in off of the event object. We can get these key1 and key2 that we passed in. Then we're creating, kind of just concatenating it with another string, and we're returning an object with 2 properties, result1 and result2. And then out here we are logging those result1 and result2. Okay, so I'll run the one with the keys, and it returns with the data that we sent in. So it wasn't that crazy of an example, but you can imagine, what different things you can do, being able to pass data back and forth. Okay. That was tip 2. Tip 3 is that you can set up REST endpoints for your Lambda functions. So there's a service in AWS called API Gateway, and this lets you basically expose your Lambda function as a HTTPS endpoint. And then you can call it with the regular post requests. You can pass in data through your query string parameters, and then you can access those in your event object. Also, it's pretty nice. API Gateway really nicely connects with your Swagger definitions, so you can import them or export them from AWS. And this is just a slide showing you the API Gateway. I have a endpoint here called JokesBoy, where you can call the different post get requests. Okay, tip 4 is about security. You can set the cores, allows you to tell AWS, hey, this Lambda function should only be called from this domain. And if it's called from any other domains, just give permission denied. You can easily also add API key authentication, right? If you guys have ever used maybe some other services, Google or Twitter API or things like that, normally you have to also send a secret key along with it, or else it will just deny. And these things are there to kind of help you prevent, DDoS attacks on your Lambda function. Because if it's totally open and public, someone could just keep hitting it, thousands of times, and then you're paying for that, and it can add up over time. So you kind of want to make sure that you are authorizing your public APIs in some way. And this is just a screenshot of the page for enabling cores in AWS in the API Gateway. Okay, my next tip is that you can send notification emails with SES. This is pretty nice because send yourself or other people emails. So you register the email in IAM, and then it will send them a verification link to that email. You click on that, and then now they're added to SES, and you can send emails. You can also hook into other services, Twilio and other things, to kind of just blast out to any email. So this is just a screenshot of the page. I actually did have just a quick demo. So I'm going to go to my sending email from Lambda. This, again, required the AWS SDK. Here we're creating a new AWS.SES object. And we're basically defining different parameters about the that kind of describe the email. So I'm sending it to this. This is my email. This is kind of the body of the email, the subject, and this is the sender email that I will show as. So this should say test worked, test from Shutterstock, and test this. Okay, so execution succeeded. The output looks fine. So I'll just check my email real quick, and I should have, yeah, test worked at 7:24 p.m. So that's in the example code too, sending yourself an email like that. Oops. Okay. Tip 6, kind of similar. In addition to emails, you can also send text messages, right? So you would use AWS SNS to programmatically send texts. You can create, they call it groups for subscriptions, applications, or topics. And also pretty interesting is that incoming SNS texts can also trigger Lambda functions. So you can send a text, someone replies to it, and then you can do something else with your Lambda function. This is just the SNS dashboard in the AWS console. And I also have just a demo of this. So I have a function named good morning text, right? This one was meant to send me a text every day at 8:30 a.m. So again, we're just requiring AWS SDK. Here we're creating a new AWS.SNS. And then this endpoint up here is my SNS tab. You can see I have a topic created called Jim's Tips and this ARN right here. So that's what you would put in the actual Lambda function. I'm just going to tell it to say hello world alert. You can change the sound. And then we do sns.publish, and that's kind of where the magic happens. It sends off the text. So let me just run this. Executing. And there I got the text message. So you guys can, take this code, send text to yourself, other people. All right, so tip 6. My seventh tip is that you can schedule your Lambda functions, right? And you can use cron expressions. So these are a really nice way of letting you describe when you want your Lambda functions to run at some point in the future. These in AWS, they refer to them as Cloudwatch events, and then you can use a schedule. And then in Cloudwatch, you can make a rule which defines that scheduling as a cron expression. And if you guys aren't familiar with it, cron expression is kind of these 6 characters where you basically say minute, hour, day of the month, and day of the week. And I think in the AWS cron, there's also year. So that kind of gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of defining when you want them to run. And then this is the page create rule, where you would actually enter your cron expression for how you want this Lambda function to run. Okay, tip 8 is that you can actually read your logs of your Lambda functions. So all of your console.log statements that you use in your Lambda functions are actually saved in AWS Cloudwatch. And it has the complete history from every time this function was ever run. And it also saves other data about how much time it took, how much you were billed for this function execution. And right, this is just a screenshot of the Cloudwatch logs. So there is kind of a lot going on here, but you can see over to the right, it says, hello, Bob, hello, James. Those are my actual console logs. All right, tip 9 is that you can really add any Node.js library. It's really easy to call out to other AWS services because you actually don't have to package the Node module for the AWS SDK with it. You can just say require AWS SDK. But you can also basically write a Lambda function and also have a Node modules folder and zip them up as a zip file and then upload into the AWS console so that you can use external libraries in your Lambda functions. Right, so I just said that. And right, so it's very easy to tie in other AWS services, but you're not limited to them. Sorry? No. Question was, do you pay for storing the node modules? I'm pretty sure you don't. For Lambda, you only are charged when it executes. So there may be a file size limit to how big your zip file could be, but yeah. And then my last tip is that you can connect these Lambda functions to your IoT devices. So there's built-in triggers for Lambda to kick off your function from an event from your IoT device. You could also maybe create scheduled tasks, right, that push messages out to your IoT devices. So things like maybe you have a script that automatically locks your doors every day after 9. Or it would start your coffee machine making something for you on weekdays at 8 a.m. So it's really, limited only by your imagination. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do. Here's some examples here of AWS IoT. That's pretty much it. This one. Questions? Oh, sorry. Yes. There was actually I forget the title of it, but there was a blog post comparing sending text from AWS to sending text with a bunch of different kind of other services that do that. And you could see the AWS costs were way lower because it's pretty much, having your own personal SMTP server instead of, going through a third party. Yep.
So this is my first exposure to Lambda functions, and just wrapping my head around it.
Mm-hmm.
The part that I'm kind of stuck is you don't have to spin up a server. It's on demand. That part doesn't sound that.
Right. You can kind of think of it as just one giant server that everyone is sharing, right? So that has all the functions loaded up onto it already, and when someone calls to your function, it just executes and runs. So yeah.
Right, but isn't there a latency hit? I'm in fintech, so I'm dealing with real-time data. But that means you have to do it daily to warm it up, to wake up every morning at 6, and then it stays up the whole day.
I mean, it depends really on what you consider to be enough. I would say definitely try it with Lambda, and if it's not enough, then explore different. I think AWS does have kind of a high high computing service also. Um, so if you need something like that, yeah,
I might be doing it soon. That's why I'm asking.
right.
Other than the shared hosting, you don't know who's going to be doing content distribution, etc.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's pretty much just including the SDK, right? The Node.js library for that database, and then implementing the functions. Yeah. When would you not use Lambda? Um, Honestly, I'm trying to use Lambda for as much as I can. You could see the call that I made from the command line. It takes maybe a second or two to respond. So if you need like super instant feedback and that 1 second is too much for you, then maybe Lambda wouldn't be perfect for that. Right. Yes, you're not going to be able to store really data in your variables in the functions, but you can definitely call to different databases. Yeah. Definitely, the Lambda functions have good integration with other AWS services. So if you want to save data in RDS, if you want to upload files to your S3 bucket, those are definitely common things that people do with AWS Lambda. Starting up an EC2 instance, I'm not really sure if you I'm not really sure when you would want to do that, but if you did want to do that, I'm pretty sure that you could from a Lambda function. Yep.
If you have let's say, a Twitter feed or some type of, let's say a Twitter feed, need to activate that for a client because they want to get sensitive information.
Hmm.
If I understand correctly, you said that with the Lambda function, I would have to throughout the day constantly ping it, so I can't really get a pub sub. I might have to constantly ping it to kind of keep it awake or keep spin it up to be able to run it for 15 minutes and after 15 minutes it kind of dies. I have to ping it again.
I mean, it's really it's really hard to notice if your function is running on a container that needs to be spun up again. Pretty much every time you call it, there's going to be 1 or 2 seconds of latency. So if that's okay with you, then you can just pretty much call the function when you need the data, right? So you don't necessarily have to worry about waking up your box that the Lambda functions are running on. Hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a common use case. Honestly, I've been using Firebase for authentication just because that's pretty easy and built into it. Um, if you wanted to do maybe more complex things or you need more exact control over what you're doing, I think Lambda would be a good way to do that. You just need to basically code that all the authentication logic yourself. Yep.
Another common, I've seen it used for a couple common patterns. So anything that you need to do in like kind of like background processing, where you need to just wake up, process, brunch, that's a perfect use case. It also you use, I think you can use webhooks with it to if you wake it up, you're generating indents. You also persist data into a queue where you can queue it up
Right. Yep. Um, you can run. I think you can run 1,000. You can run a Lambda function concurrently 1,000 times. So blocking issues might be more about your database or whatever if you're storing data there. So, but yeah, you can run Lambda functions concurrently. Yeah. Sorry. Return buffer. I'm not sure exactly. It does kind of just a callback function, sort of. So if you want to send like a stream observable or something like that, um, I don't think Lambda would work like that unless you had maybe a function that was running and sending the stream in something other than the main callback at the end of your Lambda function. Um, right, right. If your stream is longer than that, yeah.
Write it off to like S3 and then send back the link to the actual application
Mhm.
so that I can actually reference it in your storage.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.